nations out there. But the good part here in G20 summit that recently concluded earlier this month is that African Union has become part of G20 now. So help us understand the outcomes of G20 summit and that what that means for the world for the near future.
So let's start with the African Union accession. It's a significant development, but it's ironic because everyone is saying what a huge breakthrough it is. But Africa is 54 different countries. So what they're saying is they consider this entire continent or a gathering of countries almost as one member. So in the long run, will it necessarily address the individual interests of each state? How can they resolve the tribal issues and the battle between building up nation states and these tribal and fluid local interests? I don't know. It is true, however, that Africa is long overdue for having some sort of a seat at the table, even if there is a lot of internal disagreements over what that actually means. It is also true that a lot of it comes from concerns first about natural resources, which have become primary concern for many countries in light of the climate change initiatives that require alternative sources of energy, electrification, and these raw materials that are abundant in Africa, and of course the geopolitical competition with China and Russia, with China having gained a lot of influence and ground in Africa. Interestingly, neither China nor Russia showed up at the G20 summit. So this concept of whether these global gatherings are as unified as once were remains a big question. And what happens later on if they continue to push for alternatives and with the African Union stepping in is going to be very interesting. But it's certainly a significant development. There is this effort to court the global south, to give them incentives to stay with Western countries and to not become subjected to Chinese and Russian political influence, not just economic partnerships.
Absolutely. So this happened in New Delhi. So obviously we were watching this very carefully, and now this goes to Brazil, if I understand. So what has been the whole understanding of yours? We're looking at it from that part of the world. Is it what has been the major outcome? There was a declaration finally. Earlier, people thought there will not be. I know there will be. There were concerns about a few things, but I just wanted you to understand from that perspective. How does it look like? What has been the gains for some, for nations like India, who has, held this presidency very, very well, and now it goes to Brazil, another BRICS nation.
So it's interesting because it was a huge win for India. First, in terms of just having all these countries there. Second, there has been a big outcome, and I'll address it shortly, about agreements about transportation and economic links to Europe, to the Middle East. And of course, this was India pushed for a compromise solution concerning Ukraine and Russia, and the fact that it was able to gain some sort of consensus in itself for it is politically a big victory. Whether it's a big victory for the world and international interest in this is another question. But for India, without a question, it's a major boost. It's a major political boost, and it is showing as a very major emerging global player with a particular role to play. Unlike many countries, it's not seeking to necessarily mediate in every conflict or to put itself in the middle of various controversies, but it has its own interests, it's pursuing them, and it wants to be seen as a major economic and political powerhouse that will be playing a voice in global affairs. Where that voice ends up going remains to be seen via the consequent bilateral and multilateral relations. It would be smart for the United States and NATO to engage more. There is already a great deal of engagement with India on Quad defense issues and climate change and energy initiatives. There's some technology movement. from the US, but if US wants to keep India in its camp, it will need to do a lot more. And I think this is the real message here. I think Prime Minister Modi understands very well that BRICS is a vehicle more for messaging than for real economic change. The members are too diverse, too distrustful of each other, and too conflicted to really use this vehicle effectively to push for any common interest, because they don't really have a lot of common interests other than to be seen and respected. As they claim, India and China are economic competitors. They have trade and diplomatic relations, but I think these tensions will only clash more in the future. Because China is pursuing hegemony and India just wants to be left alone and to succeed, and to succeed through soft power, not through military means. But all of this will need to be resolved through diplomacy, through trade, through agreements, and through understanding that these countries will use BRICS to try to push for leverage, to try to send a message to the West. Brazil is a very complicated story. The leader there has been jailed for corruption. President Lula is very much in line with Russia, China, Iran. All three countries are being perceived increasingly as questionable at best by India. It has had a long history with Russia, but and still has a lot of trade, more even so than before, due to the economic advantage of the current situation. But it also kind of wants to be involved with the countries that don't have a president who is being pursued internationally for arrest. And Iran has become also a problem for India in recent years as well. So they are probably looking for some sort of a shift, maybe towards South Korea, Middle East, Japan, African countries where it has very good relations, even Brazil. And Lula, on the one hand, has ties to all these states, but on the other hand, he is also a pragmatist who wants to stay in power. If China's economy tanks and it cannot sustain the same level of support, if Russia continues to accumulate political problems, then it may seek to kind of shift its way towards India, towards Turkey, towards states that are seen as a little bit more stable and long-term promising. So that's where there is an opportunity for influence as well, even if right now it seems unlikely.
Right, right. So let's move from G20 to the United Nations General Assembly. How would you look at it? A bit dramatic this time, and at the same time, the president of Ukraine was also